There was one outage that I distinctly remember. Long story short, and without blaming anybody, a bunch of data in Hadoop got deleted. Like
Ooh.
70%, no backups, it got deleted, just gone. And the two emails I sent, one to Eng and one to the whole company, are, I believe, still linked at Twitter. Twitter has a Go link service. So if any current Twitter employees want to go to go/best email ever and go/second best email ever, those are both mine. And it was like, good news. We have lots of space in Hadoop to write more stuff. Bad news.
I did some
And
garbage
it was totally
collection.
an email I wrote with a sort of, this might be the last email I write to this company because I might get fired after this because we lost all the freaking data. My job is data. It's sort of pressure makes diamonds. Later, I heard people say, the joke was that, like, I love hiring ex-Twitter people because no matter how much everything is exploding, they just go like, I've seen worse. Because there was stuff was really, really bad, but also sometimes like the worst times are the best times.
One thing you mentioned from the acquirer side, like doing the technical due diligence, which is something you were involved in once you joined Ginkgo. So what does technical due diligence look like from the acquirer standpoint? At what point do you feel like, okay, I'm satisfied enough that this looks okay?
You're looking for deal breakers, right? If you're doing technical due diligence, unless it's specifically like we acquiring the magical technology that it's going to be magical, and if it's not magical, the deal's not worth it, right? Like, you're usually acquiring for some other reason. You're probably acquiring for a combination of there's some code and really good talent, and it positions us well for whatever like strategic reasons, right? So if you're at the point where you're doing technical due diligence, you're looking for deal killers, not for like, I wouldn't have done it quite that way. Right? Like, that's not a deal killer. That just adds to your integration estimate.
Welcome to the Software Misadventures podcast. We are your hosts, Ronak and Guan. As engineers, we are interested in not just the technologies, but the people and the stories behind them. So on this show, we try to scratch our own itch by sitting down with engineers, founders, and investors to chat about their path, lessons they have learned, and of course, the misadventures along the way.
Welcome back to the show, Dmitry. Fun place that I thought we could continue this conversation at is in your LinkedIn profile, you mentioned being a veteran of early Twitter fail whale wars. Maybe you can take us back a little bit and talk about that.
Yeah. So I joined Twitter on whatever the first working day was, January 2nd, January 3rd of 2010. And Twitter was a bit north of 100 people, and it was sort of very popular, but not nearly as popular as it was going to get eventually, and already in the throes of the infamous rewrite from Ruby to Scala. The fail whale was the error page. So whenever there was an internal server, what the users got was like a cute cartoon of a whale that was then christened the fail whale and became for a while synonymous with Twitter. And there was like the first couple of years were basically spent, the majority of the work was chasing down kind of one problem after another that was causing these instabilities, while also rewriting it from the original Ruby on Rails app into kind of a microservices architecture on Scala, and trying to keep up with the user growth and all of that. And that was a really kind of stressful and fun environment at the same time. A lot of very, very rapid learning as the whole company had to grow very rapidly. It was kind of the hyperscaler situation. When I joined, we were in a colo. Cloud services existed but weren't as popular. We essentially were renting servers in a co-located facility. And it was kind of a virtualized situation. So we didn't actually have good visibility into where the servers were in relation to each other. And by the time I left, we were running in like several data centers that we were running ourselves, right? So it was kind of a major migration. And there's just kind of one aspect of the scale and the growth. And a lot of, I think for me, those were like hypergrowth personally years as an engineer, just because of the exposure to so many people working on these problems and so many of these problems and kind of how they were emerging. It was really fun. It was really stressful. There was a lot of I really learned how to be on call well and how to respond to incidents and, firefight without losing your mind,
This was the
in
data.
being effective.
This was like the data platform team, right? Like, did you guys have like dedicated
So I
SREs?
was on the data platform team, but like, first off, data platform wound up getting involved in surprising ways. But second, when I started off, the company was small enough that I just sort of knew the other teams pretty well too, and like I would get pulled in just to like figure stuff out. But to give you a sense of like how the data platform would occasionally get looked into total site outages, in 2010, that was the first year I was there, we were still in the colo and we were extremely constrained by the network bandwidth within the data center between the hosts. And so we were getting the situation where we were getting a lot of errors because the web servers couldn't access the memcache servers. So there was like a big memcache cluster, and there were the web servers that were like very very light servers that were meant to be stateless, and the requests were timing out, like they just couldn't get through to the cache servers, which is basically where all the timelines are on Twitter, or at least were at the time. The way the whole thing worked was you post a tweet, there's a background daemon that sees that a tweet happened, and it materializes the timeline for everybody who follows you and updates it and sticks that in the cache. So when you actually read stuff, it's not coming from a database, it's kind of pre-built for you, right? And I'm eliding a bunch of technical detail, but that's the big picture. And so it's a very big problem when your web server can't hit the cache, right? Because that means that you can't get anything, right? And long story short, we were like, we have to kill anything that uses any bandwidth whatsoever. So, for example, we turned off the Hadoop cluster, like in the particular moment when things got particularly bad, because everything was sitting on top of each other. We were like, okay, when the web server logs are being logged to Hadoop, to HDFS, that's taking up too much bandwidth. And if, God forbid, HDFS decides to rebalance, and shifts a bunch of things between the data nodes, like that will just flood the network. We can't have that. So we just shut down the whole Hadoop cluster. And the day we did that was the day that Jimmy Lin joined Twitter. He was a professor at the University of Maryland. He is now in Toronto, I believe. And he literally joined because he was like, he was analyzing like graph data, social networks. He's like, I'm going to use their awesome Hadoop cluster. He shows up. Sorry, there is like literally no compute for you. let's just whiteboard some stuff. And the issue turned out, it was like, it just didn't make sense. But the issue turned out to be that kind of the virtualized network in our call provided to us hid from us how they actually grew Twitter's growing footprint. And so you start off with Twitter a certain size and it rents whatever, N servers, right? Of different configurations. And they're sort of in a physical same pod somewhere in that data center. And so you've got your Memcache servers, you got your web servers, you've got your Hadoop servers that are like different configurations, right? Hadoop servers, massive disk, Memcache, lots of RAM, web servers, very thin, but like you have lots of them because you want lots of parallel cores. And then you want to grow your web servers, or maybe you want to grow your Hadoop cluster, maybe you want to grow something else. And there's no physical room in the pod anymore, so they get the next pod, right? And they start allocating you things there. But to you, it looks like a flat network, right? So now what's going on is eventually you get to a situation where all of your cache, or like 2/3 of your cache, are over here on the left side, and your web servers are on the right side because maybe you didn't need to scale them as fast. And so they have to go through the interconnect between the pods, which is like really thin. And your data nodes for Hadoop are spread across all your pods. And so whenever you do any MapReduce job and it does a shuffle, it just completely saturates the network of your web servers. Right? And any server, any call between your web server and your cache server is trying to get through like MapReduce trying to shuffle 100 petabytes. It was probably 100 terabytes back then. And like we had no idea of that network topology. One of our first sort of data viz hires actually spent a while working with the network engineers and the ops folks to do like PCAP captures of network packets and figure out which protocol is talking to which IP and sort of create a map so that we kind of figure out that like, okay, all of these servers are over here and all of those servers are over there, and this is talking to that on the MySQL protocol, and that's talking to this on the TCP protocol. So now we know like who's doing what,
So you
because we needed to
basically,
reverse engineer that. So when you ask like what the hell was data doing to, involved in the fail well stuff, like you'd think it's adjusting settings on your web server or like dealing with timeouts. It's that kind of stuff, right? Because the world was bananas. So that was one. There's also one where like our first move to a data center was hilariously disastrous, and there was both
Wait.
fire and
So,
rain.
sorry. Before going into that, wait. So, but it's
Yeah.
basically shutting down Hadoop. So poor Jimmy. But then that did solve the problem. It's like from that decision, then you guys were like, okay, well now the problem's gone. So obviously it's the reshuffling, or like how did you?
No, no, no. That was just to get through like World Cup or something, because it's spiky. Um,
it's like, let's shut
and
down
then there was a
Hadoop
lot
for
of yelling
today.
at our follow. This one story leads to another, because then that was like obvious. So first we were like, we'll run the HDFS because we don't want to lose logs. Logs we're writing, scribing to the distributed system. We'll just not run any MapReduce jobs because that's
Right, right.
and then we discovered that the occasional rebalance of like the data nodes making extra copies on other nodes and not knowing about the actual layout, like even that would cause enough chatter that it would create a spike of errors on the Twitter website. So then we had to shut the whole thing completely down. Like we just ate not having logs, which is hilarious when you're trying to troubleshoot a problem and the first thing
Yeah.
to do
Right,
is
that seems
turn
a
off your log.
bit. Yeah, that seems a bit drastic, but I
Yeah,
guess.
it was. I don't recommend this. This was definitely a kind of last ditch thing. That story just comes to mind because it is so particularly like egregious. Most of the time, it wasn't stuff like that, but yeah, there was like a bunch of yelling at our hosting provider to like get them to move servers around, to get them to add network, or like that's how you actually solve it, and also try to. I think we did some stuff where we added some small caches on the web servers so that they could be
Local itself.
more in like user pinning. So there was like we started getting clever, but the first thing is just you know address the immediate pain and then like re-architect, don't re-architect, and then eventually it will get fixed.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And
That was one
Mitigate
of the
first.
lessons of there. Like first restore the service, second fix the problem,
like,
right? Not the other way around. Like engineers really want to, but why is it happening? Hold on, like let's really observe it. Like no, don't really observe it. Like the site is failing. Send it up.
I literally said that this morning to a colleague of mine. It was like, mitigate first and then figure out why it's happening.
Yeah, like capture, and that's where like as you get experience, you also learn how to capture the right telemetry, right? Like get your core dumps, like capture all the possible state that you can capture, and then like if the solution is reboot it and it mysteriously works, like reboot it,
Yeah, for
and
now,
then
for
try to
sure.
reproduce the problem on a staging server, right? Like,
Yes.
like with the decision like that big to be like, okay, let's be done with this Hadoop cluster. Like, how do you go about even like escalate that of the decision chain? Because there's multiple teams, not just Jimmy, that are impacted by this, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, it was a very small. Now people are like, "Well, how would you do it at Twitter?" Right now, I guess Ellen would just say, "Shut it down." Uh, but it was a very engineer-driven culture, and so when there was a big problem, I think, I mean, we had a CTO, but I couldn't tell you who was between the CTO and like my boss, and I was like an engineer at that point. I wasn't managing yet. I don't know that we had like VPs or directors or anything. Like it was the people who are sort of like, well, there's the guy who knows about the web services, and the woman who is like queen of cash, and like an ops guy who knows all the ops things, and they're like, oh shit, everything's on fire. Hey, what do you think about shutting down the Hadoop cluster? Well, we have to ask Dmitriy about that. And I go like, well, I want the site to work, so yeah, let's shut down the Hadoop cluster. I'll tell everybody. That's kind of it.
interesting, interesting.
Um,
It's
it,
definitely a
it, it
more
was
fun
very
environment to be
organic.
in.
There were a lot of war rooms.
Nice. What were you saying, Ronald?
I was just saying it sounds a lot more fun environment to it. There's a different kind of fun in being in this environment where you're just going through a bunch of fires and learning things together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of pressure makes diamonds. later I heard people say, the joke was that like I love hiring ex Twitter people because no matter how much everything is exploding, they just go like, I've seen worse. Because there was stuff was really, really bad, but also sometimes like the worst times are the best times.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think like this was an experience that a lot of engineers don't necessarily go through unless they worked on the ops side at some point in their careers. And this is something I see pretty regularly when it comes to incident management. Like you see a bunch of, let's say, for example, folks who have been SREs in their past lives or are SREs today, no matter how big the outage is, like you see the calmness in how they're dealing with the incident. You see how they are able to walk through the problem, able to mitigate it in time, instead of like, what the fuck's happening? Site's on fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's certainly, like not freaking out helps. And also, there's a lot. I think I put some of that in the book, or maybe I didn't and just meant to, but there's a set of skills you learn for dealing with an incident. Like it sounds simple when I say it, but like so many people don't do it. Giving updates, right? The thing is broken, you're working on it. Even just saying, I'm still looking at it, or I am looking at this particular area. Is anybody else looking at another area? Hey, how's it going with looking at that thing? Can you, and like dropping in observations in the Slack, nowadays it's Slack threads, right? In a Slack thread of just like screenshots and, oh, this thing looks funny or whatever. Just like being vocal, being loud in a sort of dedicated space for a serious incident, not for just like some minor troubleshooting, right? It is extremely helpful because then you can get multiple eyes on it and people know what's going on. There are so many, even very experienced and smart engineers who, when faced with something is failing, they kind of go dark, and then like they might show up at some point, and you have no idea, right? Like they might be working feverishly hard and just like going all out, but because nobody knows anything, it's very hard to manage the incident. It's very hard for your support people to like support you and support the users. It's hard for managers to answer, CEO emails or like what the hell. And a lot of it is just about communication. You can be doing the same exact things, but with good communication, the incident will go so much smoother and probably be resolved so much faster.
Yeah, I remember one of the feedback that I've gotten from like the second manager I had pretty early was like, you need to bring the team along, which at the time, right, I was very young and foolish, well, still foolish today. I was like, what do you mean, man? I'm like trying to do all this, like, fixing all these things. Like, I ain't got time for that. But now that, I'm on the other side, like, holy, like it makes such a huge difference in terms of actually creating a sense of like, oh yeah, we have this under control. Like there's a process to it rather than, just having things being very chaotic.
Yeah. And when a lot of people are involved, because like maybe there is a problem where it's just unclear what exactly is going on, right? Like we're seeing these errors, but we live in a microservices world, right? Like these things propagate in weird ways, like back pressure builds up. Who knows, right? What you're seeing is, well, the site's erroring and MySQL has errors. Are the MySQL errors at all related to the site erroring? We don't actually know. Right? Where else can we look? Like, there's 5,000 Grafana dashboards, right? It's just like there's a lot to do when it's not clear what's going on and the system's complex. And now I'm thinking more like Twitter circa 2015, right? And there's a lot and there's a lot of instrumentation and it becomes its own problem. Having experienced people who just take on the role of incident manager, not just from sometimes incident manager is like the person who does the reporting, who says, we will update you in another 15 minutes. But just sort of coordinating, traffic cop, right? Okay, we're exploring these 3 hypotheses about what's going on. Here's where we are on this. Here's who's working on them. If anybody has any new ideas, right, like funnel them through me so we can keep everything organized, right? And just kind of keeping everybody coordinated on that, also super useful. And so there was a lot of stuff like that we either invented or reinvented or learned, in those first few years of Twitter going bananas. Yeah, it was really fun. There was a data center that caught fire, and after it caught fire,
that's a great start to any story. Sorry.
It never ends. This podcast could go for a very long time.
Very entertaining is what I would say.
Okay,
so the data center that caught fire. Yes, please go ahead.
we moved in a bit early. The data folks were the first people to move into this data center Twitter was building out. And it was sort of our colo host couldn't keep giving us space, so we needed to move somebody out. And it was like, well, the offline data doesn't need to be as physically close, and like if the connection drops or whatever, right, we can survive that. Nobody wants anybody to be out, but offline data processing, like it's both big and separable, right? So it makes sense for us to sort of be the first through the breach. Um, but they were kind of still building the data centers, it turned out, when our racks got installed in there. So at some point there were like guys welding something on the roof, and they didn't protect it properly, and I guess there were sparks. And so
Spark
that
in this
happened.
context usually means something else, but
No, no,
nice.
no, literal fire through the roof. And then so there was a small conflagration, and then the sprinklers turned on, right? And so it's flooding. So first you have fire, then you have flooding, all the while like the servers are supposed to be running. That one was fun. There was a bunch of things. There was one outage that I distinctly remember. Long story short, and without blaming anybody, a bunch of data in Hadoop got deleted. Like
Oh.
70%, no backups. It got deleted, just gone. It was sort of a combination of misconfiguration of a tool that allowed you to do that sort of thing in the first place, and intense environmental pressure that caused kind of fairly extreme usages of the tool to be sort of normal in the first place, because normally you wouldn't do it, but we had to. And then in that case, like a slight misconfiguration was catastrophic, right? As usual, this happens over the weekend. The person who ran the faded command reported to me. We figured out this was happening. We're like in the office, in a small office, like literally sitting back to back. He's trying to fix the thing. I'm trying to recover what we can recover and update the whole company about what happened. The So there were several things out of that. One is I wrote several emails kind of updating the whole company. It was just like all at or something, whatever the handle was at the time. And the two emails I sent, one to Eng and one to the whole company, are, I believe, still linked at Twitter. Twitter has a Go link service. So if any current Twitter employees want to go to go/best email ever and go/second best email ever, those are both mine. And it was like, good news. We have lots of space in Hadoop to write more stuff. Bad news.
I did some
And it
garbage
was totally an
collection.
email I wrote with a sort of, this might be the last email I write to this company, because I might get fired after this because we lost all the freaking data. My job is data. And, the engineer was mortified. I don't even know how many people still know who that was, because like I just kind of wrote it all from first person. It was like, this happened. If you have any questions, ask me, blah, blah, right? Like kind of tried to give him space and cover. And I remember my boss at the time basically was like, one, this happens. Don't worry about it. I got you. And two, eventually this was going to happen. It doesn't feel like it right now, but it was like that first year. It was either 2010 or 2011. Like, it is going to be such a relief that this happened now and won't happen
Yeah.
anymore in this company than if this happened like 3 or 4 years from now. And sure enough, like the amount of data we lost, it seemed so massive. It was like everything. We were generating that much data in a single day 3 or 4 years later, right?
Damn.
Like losing that data would be like, it's a day's work. Like it sucks, but and when like public reporting is based on data in Hadoop, when all the machine learning recommendations, right, like just like everything is so tied into the data platform that we build, that would be so much more impactful and so much more hurtful. That first year, it was like, okay, well, some of the operations we used to do wouldn't be able, we can't do, and some but we can recover, but it'll take us a few days. And it felt huge at the time, and in retrospect, it just it didn't matter that much. Like it didn't affect the trajectory of the company at all. Like in the big picture, it didn't matter. You don't want those things to happen, but also it's useful to have this sort of perspective of how bad is it now versus we're gonna where are we going to be in a couple more years, right?
For
And
sure.
obviously doing the right thing when it happens, right? Like when it happens, making sure it can't happen anymore.
It's so
Yeah.
wise what your manager said, right? In terms of like, oh, this is like bound to happen in that. Okay, now when I say it, it sounds a bit cliche, but
Yeah.
where has he worked before that gave him sort of this perspective?
So this was Kaylee Torgerson, and he had his own sort of data consulting practice before Twitter convinced him. He was consulting with Twitter for like setting everything up, and then they convinced him to join full time. I think before that, he knew some of the folks who wound up being at Twitter through maybe his work at or with Yahoo, something like that. Remember when Yahoo was a super legit tech company?
Yeah.
Yep, yep. It's
Back in the day.
it's interesting. I've heard this sort of argument before, right? Where if you're having a lot of issues, really trying to fight for this idea that's really about prevention and that's super important. And sometimes the answer is just, hey, just let it drop, right? Like let it actually, catch on fire, and then people like
Yeah.
actually look at what happens in order instead of you wasting all this time trying to advocate for it. Is that
Yeah.
something that you I guess agree with, or you've seen it done well?
I think it depends on the specific thing that we're talking about failing, right? There are some things that can't fail live, right? I don't know, missile control systems, right? Like things involved with people's lives, uh, operations that are regulated, right? Like you can't like do fraudulent transactions, things of that nature. But there's a lot more that can fail than people think. I'm trying to remember the expression. It's something like we all test and prod. Uh, some people also have a staging environment, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and and I think there's less talk about now. A few years ago, people talked about it a lot, but the notion of testing and prod, and if you know the book Accelerate, they sort of lean on that stuff where the idea isn't that you only test in prod. The idea is that you know that stuff is going to fail in prod. And if you trust so much your staging testing and your QA and acceptance and everything else, then you're going to fall really hard when things fail in prod. Right? Like nothing tests your system like real life and real users. So if you start from the assumptions that things will fail and you need to have the observability, the ability to debug, the ability to capture all the data you need to understand things, right? And the ability to recover from errors. So save the appropriate state so you can do replay, expect that a transaction might happen several times and you need that impotency, right? Things of that nature. You'll be in a much better place, right? So it's less, I think, about just let it fail, but more like expect that something will fail that you didn't expect and think about how you're going to recover, right? So some of us are lucky enough to have been actually taught something about distributed systems. All of us who are working on the web are writing distributed systems. It's just that like some folks haven't been told that. Anytime your web server makes a call to a database, congratulations, you're in a distributed system now. Like if you made a write to a database, the database might be able to understand transactionality, but like you're outside the thing. If you have multiple web servers trying to make the same write, they might write it 3 times, and the database won't know it's the same thing unless you
Yeah.
thought about it ahead of time, right? It's a distributed system, and a lot of folks are just sort of, I make the call, and then the thing happens, and well, what if you make the call twice? What if you need to undo the call because it's actually part of the classic example, shopping carts, right?
I
Um,
tested it. I tested it with my unit tests. How,
that's
how
right.
would
Work
this
from
happen?
Yeah, or you create these crazy elaborate systems that just take. In some cases, they're very good investment, but not everybody can make that investment. And sort of being prepared for these kind of errors and being able to detect the errors, being able to recover from the errors is hugely important. And I think that goes. I mean, that's a data engineering thing, but it's also any kind of service engineering thing, right? Just and operating a 24/7 web service or web-based service, you need to know how you need to think about those things and not just rely on sort of testing. And testing is good. Definitely test. Test as much as you can.
So some of the things you're mentioning are also in the book that you have, which is The Missing README. We'll definitely
Yeah.
link it in the show notes and highly encourage people to go check it out. What
Yeah, I get
prompted?
like 10 cents per copy. Please do.
We also encourage people to buy the book, not just check it out. What prompted you to write the book in the first place?
I think it was running into situations multiple times where folks who were new grads or kind of a couple years out would be good programmers and very capable of doing whatever we needed them to do, but wouldn't know these things that a lot of us take for granted that are kind of unwritten. Once you're in the industry for a while, you kind of pick up how the industry does things.
Yeah.
And because we sort of just picked it up from our peers, we forget that it's knowledge you have to acquire. And then the new person comes along and they're sort of struggling for a while. And then maybe they pick it up. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? And a lot of problems can be avoided if you just explain why things are the way they are. And so after yet another round of sort of explaining to somebody who is very bright, intelligent, capable, but is doing things kind of the wrong way just because nobody ever told them what observability is, or like, you know, logs are not just print to standard error or something, right? Or like what goes into a log, right? It's just stuff like that that is, it's not rocket science. It's just stuff that you need to know and you can eventually learn, right? That just, why don't we just write it down in one place so that people can my vision for it was a tech lead has a stack of these things on their desk and they get their new batch of new hire grads, new grad hires or interns or whatever, and just like read this over the next 3 weeks. If stuff is weird and you don't understand why we're doing a stand up or something, right? There's answers probably in there, but I can also, I'm happy to help you. But like, here's an answer so that you can just read that, and we'll be like 80% there. And so I shared that observation with somebody I knew from Twitter, actually, like on Twitter, not from the company, Chris Ricamini, who was also tweeting about something along those lines, and sort of we decided that it would be fun to actually write a book. We played around with ideas of courses and other things, but we settled on a book. And it was really fun, and it was surprisingly hard. Sort of write down the basic stuff. Oh, how does the basic stuff actually work?
In that process, did you learn like new things that, even though, right, like you said, these concepts are, some are fundamental, but like, did you learn new things in the process of writing it?
I think so. There were definitely some concepts that sort of I knew, but I never examined and tried to explain. That trying to write down caused me to re-examine. I also read a lot of sort of different approaches to how to build evaluable systems, or what kind of log goes where, or how to handle exceptions, dealing with null pointers. And at some point you sort of just have to decide which of the sets of ideas you go with. But that part was really interesting. Like, most of the time writing the book isn't the actual writing, it's reading and trying to synthesize, like, what am I trying to say here and what do I actually believe in? I read this argument, do I actually believe that argument?
Nice.
So there was a fair amount of that. We also we have a chapter there about Scrum and Agile, even though I'm not a particularly strong believer in capital S Scrum and capital A Agile. It is hilarious to me that like the Agile Manifesto is the first thing it says is something like people over process, or getting things done over process, something like that. And then like we codify these super elaborate processes, and there's like the retros and the stand-ups and the planning poker and this and that. There's just like so much of it. And people talk shit about Agile and Scrum because what they're exposed to is the process. And the process doesn't work for them, right? So I spent a bunch of time in the book kind of explaining what is the process trying to do, and trying to say that understand why it's there, and then you'll be able to use it or toss parts of it out. What you can do is either just say, this process is stupid, I'm not going to do it, and then just like have no process because you're probably going to fail. These things emerge for a reason. Or follow it, sort of cargo cult way, right? Just sort of, well, we're supposed to write stories as a blank, I want to blank. So I'm going to write a user story that says, as a sysadmin, I need
This is
the
getting too
package
real.
version to be updated to 1.3.7. And it's like, no, that's not a user story. That is just a waste of words. Right? Like, if that's all you want, just write down, we need to upgrade the thing.
I remember
The
writing
number of
pretty much
hours.
exactly that, and being like, "This seems really stupid." But
I mean, you know what's funny? Like, the number of hours I've seen spent on how story points should be. Should they be based on number of days, number of hours,
Yeah.
some random thing you make up and
Yeah.
you say, well,
Even
it's logically this thing or relative to how much time other things take.
Yeah.
And so the reason I was laughing so hard through the process because I had a colleague on my team who was a Scrum Master. I loved working with that colleague. Anytime he would have a stand up, he would basically say, I'm going to wear my Scrum Master hat. And I would always laugh out loud when he would say that because I'm like, hey, man, I care the least about your Scrum Master hat. Anyway, everything that you were saying was just reminding me of all those conversations and how many hours people burn to with the process and to plan to get stuff done. And sometimes like the amount of time it would take to get that done is less than the amount of time it takes to
Yeah.
just put the process behind it.
Blind following of the process is very bad. And the guy who invented points is now like, that's, I would like to take that back. Because people did not get what I was trying to do here. Whatever it was meant to be, the sort of the agile consultants have taken over. But there is merit to trying to say, like, these tasks are different sizes, like
Yeah.
how much can I actually take on, having some sort of methodology to not commit. Because without that stuff, every single team I've seen, right? Like, you commit to a bunch of stuff, and at best, half of it is done at the end of your time box, right? Because, like, you're kind of bad at estimating. We're all bad at estimating. Let's acknowledge the fact that we're bad at estimating and bake it in, right? How do we get better at estimating? Well, like, if we had some sort of a projection, we could see how big our error is, and then we could drive it down. But then, so, like, the logic makes sense. It's the, like, oh, is a point a day? Like, should it be a Fibonacci sequence? And, like, there is reasons for making it a day. There's reasons for making it a Fibonacci sequence. But if you take it as religion and dogma, it doesn't do anything. Like, it fails when you kind of take it as dogma. It works when you understand why it's there. And just like with any kind of, like when you're in high school and they teach you the essay structure and it's very stilted, and they insist that you write it that way, and you're like, but when I read, John Didion or somebody like who's an excellent writer, they never do any of this. And the answer is like, that's because they know the rules. Like, when you know the rules, you know which rules to break and which rules to stretch. When you don't know the rules, you just write nonsense that is impossible to follow. So, like, learn the rules, understand what's there. Once you understand what's there, absolutely, like, toss it. Don't follow the thing without understanding why it's there.
Yeah.
I did not expect this to be an agile
Yeah.
podcast. I was hoping to hear about data engineering.
I think every engineer and talk to them about agile has some strong emotion associated with it. Either they hate it or they love it.
Or hate to love it, or love to hate it.
All of that. So in terms of writing the book, like you mentioned, it was a very hard thing to get through. And some other folks have also mentioned that writing a book is not just a lot of hard work, but it might not be as lucrative as one might think. Did you know, like, what? No, well, one, I want to know your opinion, whether that's true or not. And again, I know the measure of lucrative can be very different.
I'm
for different
giggling because
people.
Dmitry is giggling. That's why.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on.
But I'm trying to validate what I heard and whether that's true or not.
Yeah,
The other
yeah.
part is like, did you already know going in that this is what would happen?
So, first off, unless you have some sort of ridiculous hit on your hands, and there are a few, chances are you're going to make like pennies per hour for the amount of time you spend writing a book. So, from a financial perspective, it doesn't make sense. For some people, it makes sense if, like, they're using it to advance their consultancy, right? Or kind of create a brand, and part of the brand is an author of technical books. Or there are some people who are just who write these runaway hits, and they probably do make decent money from it. Although I suspect the ones that I'm thinking of were not setting out to make money. They were just like this book needs to be written, so I'm going to write it. And then if I make some money from it, for example, in the data space, Martin Kleppmann's book, right,
Oh, yeah.
Designing Data Intensive Applications, it's like 10 years old now, and it's an absolute classic that everybody gets as their first recommendation for if you're involved in data or distributed systems at all, you have to buy this book. By the way, you have to buy this book. So he's probably made some decent money out of it. I highly doubt he wrote it because he was expecting to like cash in, right? Like he wrote it because he felt that this book needed to exist, and he's very good at explaining things and has a very encyclopedic and broad knowledge of the space. So yeah, I knew that going in. I know a few folks who have written books before, and they all said that. I think Josh Wills showed up on your podcast, so him and a bunch of others. I was pretty lucky to work with folks who were very knowledgeable and published a bunch of O'Reilly stuff. It was the sort of thing that I felt is a service. I was hoping, like, the vision wasn't piles of money in my bank account. It was stacks of books on tech leads' desks, like the vision I described before. And I was like, that would be awesome and cool, and I want to make that happen. So we can just generally lift up the level a couple inches.
Yeah.
So that was it.
What is the process of writing like, especially when you're working with a co-author?
So do you want to know like the actual writing or sort of the pitching and everything else?
Actually, both. So one aspect is like both of you, like you saw the co-author on Twitter and you're like, hey, seems like there's some common topics we are talking about. So let's get together and write the book. But then when you come together, like, what does the process of writing a book look like? Because, and the reason I'm asking this is, we've spoken with folks about writing in general before. It's something that is a topic that both of us are interested in, and we've also heard a lot of our listeners interested in like how to get better at writing. And one aspect is like, it's hard enough to write a blog post, let alone write a book. So what does that process look like, going from outlines to chapters to the final book? And I would also love to know some aspects of like finding a publisher, for example. Like, how do you go about doing that and things like that?
So I guess going backwards a little bit, in terms of the actual writing, when you have sort of an outline or at least a general idea of what the different chapters are, I don't know how it works for other co-authors. For me and Chris, it worked pretty well because we're both pretty experienced open source contributors. And we're very used to this general idea of, you say, I'm going to do a thing. There's some people weigh in on the design and like what to watch out for. Or maybe you have a first draft of it and they say, oh, don't do it that way, do it a different way. And you rewrite it. And maybe they like put a patch on your patch to sort of adjust some things. And then, some third person says, hey, you should add a test here or there, right? And you just have this very iterative, heavily reviewed, collaborative development process. And both of us sort of marinated in that kind of environment. Like, both of us are Apache committers and non-Apache PMCs. So that part, the collaboration, came very natural, right? I wrote a thing, I half hate it, but there's some stuff here. Please take a look. He does a review, edits it, with the edits visible in a Google Doc. Accept. Oh, let's talk about this. Gigantic sidebar discussion and comments, finally resolve, and so on. But it felt very natural. Like, it felt like writing code, except in English, So that part was great. We had some hijinks in like going between Google Docs and trying to use Git and trying to use Microsoft Word Live because of like publisher constraints. That part wasn't so fun, but the actual sort of exchanging comments and figuring out what we're trying to do, I think we had like maybe 3 calls/video calls through the whole time. The rest of it was just back and forth on the docs.
Wow.
I would
up until like a month
more.
ago, Chris and I hadn't met. We've known each other since like 2011. We hadn't met in person until a month ago.
Wait, so you wrote a book together,
we're
but you
not
met the
meeting in
person. Wow.
Yeah, and we live like an hour and a half away from each other. But it was like pandemic kind of,
Yeah.
But yeah, that part was great, and we sort of, in the first step of that was writing the pitch and sort of making sure that we're on the same page and talking through like, what do you actually want from the book? What should we include? What shouldn't we include? Why is this important? Right, and just making sure we're on the same page. And I think both of us kind of there's enough mutual respect, that we don't feel it's a loss of face to give on something, and we trust the other person. Like if they insist on something that like they know what they're talking about, right? So that was good. In terms of finding a publisher, most tech publishers have very clear sort of proposal guidelines. O'Reilly has a Google Doc that you can copy that basically you fill out, and it asks, what is this book about? Why are you the right person to write this book? Give us an outline. Are there other books about this? How is yours different? Those kind of questions, right? And you just like email workwithus@O'Reilly.com and like they get back to you. And then for Missing README, we actually wound up going with No Starch, which is a different publisher, because we thought that they got what we were trying to do a little bit better. Because Missing README is kind of a weird book in terms of defining its audience, because it's a technical book, but it's not about code, but it's not it kind of straddles a bunch of things.
Yeah.
And for that one, we had a draft chapter. It was chapter 6. The first thing we wrote was a chapter on tests, because that's what everybody loves, right? Tests. And we had we asked for a sample edit from our publishers, like the publishers who were like, we would like to publish your book. We said, okay, well, we have several publishers who said they would like to do that. We want to go with somebody who gets what we're trying to do. Can we see what an edit looks like? Because we hadn't ever worked with an editor.
Wait, so this is before you said yes to the publisher, they would edit the chapter that you wrote?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't think that's particularly common, but I don't think that's common. But we were in a situation where we were choosing between publishers, and they were pretty involved, and both of them were sort of pushing the book in different directions. And we were like, well, how do we decide? I think the real work will be like, what is the actual value of working with the publisher versus self-publishing online, right? It's a professional editor and the distribution network, right? And so we wanted to find out. We understand what the distribution network does. We don't understand what the professional editor does because we hadn't worked with one. So we wanted to see what that feels like. So we got notes back.
Was it super different, from the different editors, like the tone and the?
Yeah, it was. Now it's been years, so I don't quite remember, but I do remember that both the sort of the kind of comments we got and the volume of comments we got was quite different.
Okay.
And I think we actually went with the one who gave us more, red ink, because we wanted the tough love, and they were very helpful. Financially, self-publishing probably would have gotten us more money, but fewer readers, is because you take a much bigger cut when you publish on Amazon or something. You don't get as much distribution, like not as much visibility. But I think the editor contributed a lot and sort of pushed us to stay to some conventions and structure that we were deviating from, being sort of newbie writers. Really helped us also clarify things, be more succinct, kind of very. I would sometimes go on, as I do in this podcast, and have like flowery language, and we just like cut it out ruthlessly, just like make it very, very easy to read. Like appeal to a broad audience, not of all of whom are native or very fluent English speakers, things like that. So I think it was very helpful.
Interesting. So there's one interesting thing, like some of the blog posts that I like reading are people kind of describing things in a very organic way, as if like if you're reading that blog post, it's as if the person is talking to you. One example that comes to mind is Tim Urban. He has a blog called Wait But Why. Amazing blog. I would highly encourage folks to check it out. When you read that, his posts are super long, but they're extremely easy to read. And the other day I was drafting a blog post and I was thinking about this only. And I'm like, okay, I can make it super succinct and cut it and make it crisp. On the other hand, I can just write as if I was talking. And I like the latter part in terms of when I read stuff. In general, I just I tend to fully read those blog posts as opposed to the ones which are very formally written, because it's just easy to read that. So when you're trying to...
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you ever look up recipes online?
Recipes online? Yeah, all the time.
Yeah. So do you read the like? I was going out for a walk with my dog, and I was watching the fall leaves, and it
No, I
reminded me
just
of.
don't. No, no, no. It's just like the bullet points, like step one, step two, step three. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Okay, makes sense. So what you're saying is depends on the content of the block of the book in this case.
And how much you vibe with it, right? Like there are actually some recipe writers where like I enjoy the essay enough. I'm like, yeah, this is good stuff. Actually, I'm kind of
Yeah.
enjoying this, right? Because
Yeah.
it's creative writing, right? Like I just like write an interesting essay about like whatever what the smell of the soup evokes for them, and it's engaging. And some of it is just like trite, like you're just padding the page so you can shove more ads in front of me, and like
Yeah.
just give me the ingredient list, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think it really depends on the writer and the audience. Right?
Makes
Came,
sense. What I was
came
getting
for
at
the
is, like, in terms
Portuguese
of
egg tarts and stayed for the writing. Nice, nice. Sorry.
no, no, no. Where I was trying to go with this is it you who defines the tone of what the content should be, or is it up to the editor to push you in a direction and abide by the voice that they want you to have in the book?
I think the publisher reserves the right to not publish your book if they think it's bad.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But you don't have to take the editor. Like ultimately, you're the writer. The editor is making suggestions.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah. So like on my personal blog, and Chris on his blog have much more of a sort of individual voice, maybe. But yeah, I guess it was a little bit more sort of clear, succinct. The more you insert asides and stories and other things of that nature, the more sort of you stand the chance of losing the reader. Um,
Yeah, that's fair. In this case, for folks who might noodle with the idea of writing a book, would you recommend it?
I'd say know why you're doing it because it'll take longer than you think. It'll be more work than you think, and it can be highly rewarding. I hear from people who've read the book and I get such nice feedback. It is very rewarding to know that it's out there and that it's actually helped some people. Definitely don't do it for like money or fame, you know. But if you're driven to sort of like, I know this book needs to exist and I don't know who else will write it, so I might as well do it, right? And you think you can actually go through it. In the end, like any large project that you finish and are proud of, right, it has its own reward. But that's how I view it, right? Like I got some money out of it. It paid for that stupid Microsoft Office Live license. It was more than that. It was more than that, but it's definitely not. I could earn way more money with that time doing like I don't know expert interviews or something.
In terms of roughly number of hours, I know it's super hard to quantify this. How long do you think this took?
I don't know. It was so spread out over the pandemic year, and I didn't keep track, but easily in the hundreds, like low hundreds, maybe 200.
I see.
I think Chris Ricamini, my co-author, published a blog post about writing a technical book when it came out, and he might have an estimate for how much he spent.
True, true, true. Because it's cool.
People could Google it.
Yeah.
And
You will find that and link it in the show notes. Go ahead, go on.
do you think you would have done it if it was just you? I'm asking because for me, for this podcast, for example, Ronak has been huge in terms of kicking my ass, being like, "Yo, Guang, where's this thing you promised to do 2 weeks ago?
Yep.
Go, just kidding, just kidding."
Yeah.
But did that kind of play into a factor in terms of like getting the thing actually out the door?
I think definitely having a commitment to somebody else and knowing that they depend on me to do my part definitely helped me actually finish it. I probably wouldn't have finished it if it was just me being like, I could sleep an extra hour or I could get up and go, right? Like, I'll go for sleep.
I'm also very grateful for
Yeah.
Ronak. Thank you.
Same, Guang. These days, Guang has been pinging me every day what things I need to do.
Excellent.
Anyway,
Cool, yeah. So maybe doing a bit of a pivot in the last 15 minutes. But yeah, let's talk about acquisitions. So this is something that you mentioned before. You've been on like sort of both sides of it. And the reason why I'm very
Yep.
curious is that recently I had a friend whose sister kind of went through this process of they worked at a startup for like a few years and then they like got bought up by like a bigger company. And then it seemed pretty interesting in terms of right like how you think about like how much equity is worth, right? Like in the interview process, right? Like if the company is really good, they maybe give you some projections, right? In terms of like, oh yeah, if we exit for this much money, right, this is how much your
Yeah.
stocks are worth. Yeah, like just very curious in terms of how to think about acquisition, I guess, from like an engineer's perspective, and also like how do you integrate with the company and all those sort of things.
Yeah. I think I don't have a lot of insight about the financial part of it. Stock options are not real money until they are, and all those projections about like if we exit for this versus that, like this is how much you get. Don't factor in dilution, or if they do, it gets very complicated, and there are calculators online, and like you can play with those, but it's monopoly money. Um, but in terms of integration, yeah, so I was kind of on both sides of this. I've been at Twitter when we acquired companies and we integrated them into our teams. Also at Zymergen and at Ginkgo Bioworks. At Ginkgo, I led acquisition in a couple of places, things, or did technical due diligence. Actually, at all three of them, I did technical due diligence. And the biotech company that I worked for, Zymergen, where I was the CTO and VP Eng, got acquired by Ginkgo. And so my job was essentially to make sure that the software team gets properly integrated into a new environment. And I think there are several different ways that this can work. And it's important during the acquisition process for all parties to agree sort of on what they're doing, right? If it's a acqui-hire or sort of intended to be a growth of the acquirer's engineering team, it's one thing. If it's the Facebook acquiring Instagram or WhatsApp kind of situation where you're acquiring a product and a team and it's going to be standalone, it's very different, right? Uh, you definitely don't want. So, and I think the second case is you want to keep the team intact. You want to have a conversation up front about what does and doesn't need to change and on what schedule in terms of like transitioning onto the parent company's infrastructure, in terms of adopting their standards versus not adopting their standards, and so on. Most of the acquisitions I've been on either side of have been more of the first nature, where you integrate the teams, and the danger there is that the integration doesn't go, and like for years afterwards, people are like, well, this is company A engineers or company A practice, and that's why things look the way they do. And you want to be very clear about sort of how and in what order you're going to integrate things, or if there are competing solutions, which one's taking over, and when, and kind of work aggressively to merge. One thing I did very intentionally in the Ginkgo Zymergen acquisition was work with my counterpart on the acquirer's side to, as much as possible, have teams that are, because the software engineering teams were actually roughly similar. I think we added like 30% to the engineering team, maybe even more. So shuffling the teams so that there are acquired engineers on multiple teams with the acquirer's department. And that does two things. One, it sort of prevents that us and them kind of mentality, right? Because like your team is your team now, and that helps get over that barrier mentally. Um, but two, you also have these kind of tendrils in multiple teams, right? So it becomes that much easier to find out how things work when you're like, what's going on with whatever core services team? Well, I know somebody there, like it's baked in, right? Because I worked with her, in my previous company, and like, so whatever good stuff kind of comes with your culture can sort of be introduced to multiple teams all at once, and the communication flows a little bit better because so much in a larger company of communication flows through not like organizational lines, but who you know. And
Yeah.
a team coming in as an acquired team doesn't know anybody, right? So fundamentally at a disadvantage. And I don't mean disadvantage as like a competition of us versus them, but it's like you're joining a new company except you didn't even interview, right? Like you have no idea what they're doing or why you're having this kind of support network that's spread throughout. lets the organic network work. Right? So I think that's pretty important. And yeah, remembering that the acquirer is the acquirer, and there's a reason they acquired you. If they were hoping to, I don't know, modernize their architecture, and you come in and the teams are like, but our stuff work. Like, well, with all due respect, the whole point was that we're going to change some things. So let's talk about what things make sense to change and which things don't make sense to change, and maybe not change all things at once, but we're going to modernize the architecture because that's the whole point of us being acquired. And like, you can't come in and be like, you all are idiots, you're doing everything wrong, we're going to do things our way, like, how could you possibly have made the classics are like, it's a legacy system. Like, of course there are going to be things that are broken. If you looked at your system with fresh eyes, you would also see a bunch of things that are broken, right? Like, chill out a little bit, cut out the well at whatever Ginkgo we, at Google we, at whatever, right? Just try to find what to appreciate in the new environment, and remember that there's a reason they brought you in, and there's value in what you're bringing to.
So in a way, as you're going through the acquisition process, sounds like there are, I might do a poor job of describing it, but two goals you're trying to fulfill. One is from a technology stack standpoint. A successful merging of teams means you don't have two independent stacks, but you have one stack where aspects of the new stack are kind of embedded into the new one, slowly evolve, parts that you would still keep, but towards the goal of reaching one end where it looks the same. And the second aspect is the team, where the teams don't end up being two independent teams, but rather one team, and people are bringing some different ideas to the table from the acquisition side. But at the end of the day, you have all of the new folks spread across the entire company to kind of spread that connectivity tissue in a way.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think you captured it better than I did, actually. Yeah, you got it. And also, especially when it's a small startup being acquired by a much larger company, knowing that there's opportunities to do something else. Right? Part of the something you get at a larger company that you don't get at a small company is an opportunity to sort of get a different job without changing your jobs. Right? So if you've been doing whatever data infrastructure for a couple of years, and now you want to do, I don't know, front end, right? Like, you're just really like, there's a way to transition. Like, you can just make the connection, you can transition, and like, they might have the support systems and all of those things, or just being like, I've been on, I don't know, support systems, and I want to go into ads, right? When companies get acquired by the likes of Google or Salesforce or Meta, right? There's just so many different things that engineers can do, right? It opens up opportunities internally. And a lot of the times, I know from the time we were at Twitter, and Twitter was pretty acquisition happy for a while and acquired small teams that were really good. And some of the best acquisitions wound up being, it's 4 people that a year or two later all work on different teams, but it's like, oh yeah, they came from that startup. Like, they're all really good, and their influence is felt kind of throughout the organization. They're not necessarily like a small little team that you kind of deploy to different places to fix things, right? It's just that they wind up having influence all over the place.
And one thing you mentioned from the acquirer side, like doing the technical due diligence, which is something you were involved in once you joined Ginkgo. So what does technical due diligence look like from the acquirer standpoint?
It really depends on the context, right? Like, you might go through the tech stack, start developing a vision of how it would integrate with your tech stack. Depending on the nature of acquisition, you might get to interview people, or you might just get to talk to sort of the CTO or sort of like the engineering leads, but they don't want to tip their hat, and they want internally the rumors to start, so they don't expose you to the team. So it can get a little bit nuanced. So maybe you'll see some design docs and things like that. There's usually something called a clean room that but once there's a fairly strong understanding that this might actually happen, the company that's being acquired starts sharing a bunch of information about their financials, about their cap table, about their product, about their customers, like all of that. And it goes into sort of a third party where you can look at the documents there, but then if the deal falls through, your access gets revoked, right? So as an engineering leader, you might get access to that sort of thing. and look through and ask additional engineering questions and so on. As an IC, you might be invited into sort of architecture discussion or presentation if things are a little bit more open. And so they're like, we really want to understand how their streaming platform works, right? Like, let's get our streaming platform person. They're the only person who understands any of this. We need them in the room.
I see. And in this case, like many times the actual system in the works is rarely the same as what you have in the design docs, partly because in design docs, you start somewhere, you start implementing, and the system evolves just like a living organism of sorts.
Yeah.
When you're doing the due diligence, you want to make sure you understand not just the good parts of the system, but also the limitations. And it's not that the person on the other side is trying to hide something, but they might not see the limitations the same way you do, so they might not be as forthcoming with some information as you might expect it to be. So at the end of the due diligence, like, what does the goal look like? At what point do you feel like, okay, I'm satisfied enough that this looks okay?
Yeah, I think you go into it assuming that things don't work 100% of the time or 100% perfectly, and you're looking for deal breakers, right? If you're doing technical due diligence, unless it's specifically like we acquiring the magical technology that it's going to be magical, and if it's not magical, the deal's not worth it, right? Like, you're usually acquiring for some other reason. You're probably acquiring for a combination of there's some code and really good talent, and it positions us well for whatever like strategic reasons, right? So if you're at the point where you're doing technical due diligence, you're looking for deal killers, not for like, I wouldn't have done it quite that way. Right? Like, that's not a deal killer. That just adds to your integration estimate.
Makes sense. I think that kind of puts perspective. Puts things in perspective for me, at least. So that makes sense.
Yeah. An important thing there is not so much, to like look for problems, but look for what will it actually look like to integrate or incorporate this into what we're doing, right? Like, how are they doing authorization and authentication? Is that going to be an easy lift and shift, or are we going to like have to rethink the whole thing? Right? Some subtle gotchas that are kind of deep in the weeds, but can really change the timeline for like getting the thing to actually work, and maybe like adjust the strategy. Right? Like, okay, we should let this run separately for a while because it. They run on GCP, we run on AWS. That's a massive migration. Maybe we should just never do it, right? Like, it'd be easier to rewrite it. Like, just have them write a new one on our system or whatever. Right? Like, those kind of things. Like, you're working out a high-level initial plan of like what's likely to be, and hopefully talking to your counterpart there, so that you're all on the same page about like what technically needs to happen. You're not getting down into like, how they deal with transactionality. Or
you use Memcache, I would use Redis. That's not the conversation you're gonna have with
them. So, but like they're using Redis, we're using Memcache. Right? Like, maybe you talk about that. Like, do we run it for a while? Like, how's it?
I see. So in a way, technical due diligence is kind of a data point for, I would say, CEO and others who are the decision makers in this process to figure out at what point this thing would be operational as part of an integrated stack, and how much it would cost us to make that happen, and if there are any deal breakers in the process.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Well, Dmitriy, sorry about running late on time. I didn't pay attention, but this has been another awesome conversation with you. And we wanted to talk about what you're doing next, but maybe we'll talk about that some other time. And thank you so much.
Maybe we'll do it when I'm actually doing it.
Let's totally do that. And thank you so much for sharing all the stories.
All right, my pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and learn more about us at softwaremisadventures.com. You can also write to us at hello@softwaremisadventures.com. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.